So I'm now at the second part of this lecture about other women, same war, which is called War Lies. And Riverbend notes early on that she gets emails constantly reminding me of the tragedy of September 11th and telling me how the Arabs brought about all this upon themselves. Never mind it was originally blamed on Afghanistan, who, for your information, aren't Arabs, on page 46. So again, we know this, right? I mean, we know that Afghanistan is the Pashtun, and they speak Pashto, they speak Dari. There are many tribes, and they're not in any way Arabs. It's like, no. Iraq, yes, which is this mixture of Sunni and Shia, where it's a Shia majority, Sunni minority, and the Sunni minority rules the Shia majority, right? In this painfully toxic sort of way. But in the American, and I should add, for the most part, Canadian mind, all Middle Easterners are kind of like, well, they're all Arabs. They just all speak Arabic, and they merge into this sort of brown mass of not quite human beings who don't appear to value human life and appear to be crazed about their religion and are barbarians. Because remember that barbarians, the word barbarian comes from barbar, which is the noise that the Greeks heard when they listened to the Persians, and they heard this bar, and so they called them barbarians because of the language. So after a while, and this deep irony of their anti-feminist politics, because the Bush White House is not a feminist place to be, then after a while they decided, when all the other lies basically started to fall apart, they were like, okay, we're feminists, and we're going to Iraq to save girls. We're going to make sure that girls got a chance to go to school. It's like, well, what about doing that in the United States? Like, maybe girls could go to school in the United States too. Like, how about if you actually put everybody into a good school, not just any school, not just throw them into a place and say, okay, this will do for you, because after all, you're not going to be running the country. The people who are going to run the country come out of the Ivy League, and they are born into wealth, and they're born into etc. So this was all going to be about women's freedom. Well, talk about, there was a certain point when face palming was like all you could do. Like every day you're like, oh no, oh, look at this, because it was just, it just became so incredibly amoral. It was amoral all the way along. But anyway, so Riverbend says, I can see the image now. My cousin's roaming the opening of our cave. She's so good. Holding clubs and keeping a wary eye on the female members of their clan, and us, cowed, frightened females all gathered in groups, murmuring behind our veils. Oh, she's so good on 92. And this is exactly the kind of image you get from something like The Handmaid's Tale, which is in no way about the Muslim world. It's about this sort of crazed evangelical Christian world, where everything is done in the name of the Bible, which has been apparently edited. Of course it has been. There's very little concept in Islam of the West. How many people in the West have read the Quran? Less of the cultural uses of the veil, which is which one of us born in the West can easily tell the difference between the chador, the hijab, the burqa, the niqab. Like if there was a little exam right now. It's like, okay, well, so here's, to remind us all, is a slide of face coverings and body coverings for us. Because this became a hotspot for the politics. It's like, well, people who are covering up their bodies like this, that's not democratic. It's like, oh, I thought it was democratic to be able to do what you wanted to do and to observe your religion freely and all that stuff. If we're ignorant about other people and their customs and their cultures, but decide they should be changed because they're different, and so as a result of the difference frightening to us, we might pay attention to our own culture, which is technological. Maybe we can get that straight. That we can learn a bit about ourselves. So when Mark Kimmett stutters through a press conference babbling about precision weapons and military targets in Fallujah, who was he kidding? Fallujah is a small city made up of low, simple houses, little shops, and mosques. Is he implying that the 600 civilians who died during the bombing and the thousands injured and maimed were all insurgents? All our houses, shops, and mosques now military targets? On page 254. Sure they are. And that's the point, right? Is that this, the White House, starting with the Bush first White House in 1991, between 1988 and 1992, began to hide behind this language of, surgical strikes and precision munitions and smart bombs and blah, blah, blah. It's a bunch of junk. I mean, they have these weapons, yeah, but they still go on killing people who are innocent, as far as we know, and accepting, as they call it, collateral damage. And collateral damage is another one of these bloody phrases that came out of this war. And it really is a bloody phrase. It was like, collateral damage. But Fallujah was a shooting gallery. And it became one 3 times. Another whole story. Riverbend is, like many of the rest of us in the world, keeping track of lies being told to support the war. And she says this war started out as a war on WMD, right? We remember weapons of mass destruction. When those were not found and proof was flimsy at best, it turned suddenly into a war against terrorism, right? Remember the GWAT, the global war on terror? When links couldn't be made to Al-Qaeda or Osama bin Laden, besides on Fox and in Bush's head, it turned out to be liberation. Call it whatever you want. To me, it's an occupation on 15. It's like, yes, right? That's exactly right. This is the same fundamental situation as we had with Vietnam. So despite the fact that America is already stuck in Afghanistan trying to get to some endpoint which they didn't know what it was going to be, like what did victory look like? What was it going to look like? But here they are replicating the same thing in Iraq. What should enrage us all is that the war was just another capital big B, capital L lie. It was a big lie that hundreds of thousands of people died or been permanently damaged. Permanently, right? Children, people are freaking out about the idea of children not going to school for, like, say, another term. Or maybe even 2. It's like, oh my God, we'll never recover from this. It's like, really? Well, there's a generation of people in Iraq who never went to school at all because the war started in 2003 and it didn't finish until 10, roughly, years later, and it still wasn't safe to go out. So how about that? For, let's check our privilege, as we like to say, and think about 10 years lost. So if you're at school and you're 8, you don't go to school again because it's too dangerous to go out into the streets. It's too dangerous maybe to live in Iraq. So you have to leave, and you are illiterate at the point that you get to be 18. You are unschooled unless you're very lucky, and you have, say, literate parents who can teach you how to read, teach you how to do some basic math. But otherwise, so these are the costs of war, and this was Marilyn Waring's part, right? So, let alone the wounded, which is another. And we can't even acknowledge the dead, which is what Bush refused to do. He refused to show pictures of the dead. It was illegal to show pictures of the dead, dead Americans, that is. Dead Iraqis, fine. Dead Americans, no. So Riverbend says, what about the death? I don't mean just the images of dead Iraqis scattered all over, but American dead too. People should have to see those images. Why is it not okay to show? Why is it not okay to show dead Iraqis and American troops in Iraq? But it's fine to show the catastrophe of September 11th over and over again on 254. It's like, yeah, well, we know why, because the deaths of the falling of the Twin Towers and the killing of the people of 9/11 is great propaganda, and the deaths of Americans, young American men and women in Iraq is not good propaganda. So you don't show that. Now, eventually, Tammy Salicio took a picture of coffins as the planes. These planes were, as I think I've said before, the planes that brought the dead troops home, flew at night. That is, they were. It was I think it's a 10-hour flight from Iraq through. They were probably. I'm not sure where they were refueling or stopping down, but these would have been essentially military flights or on a military schedule, even if there were civilian. But usually they were military, big cargo haulers, and they would bring in they were just full of dead people, basically, coffins. And eventually, and they landed at 3 in the morning, so that you were not allowed to go meet them. If you were the say husband of a dead soldier, you were not allowed to go and meet the body. That was forbidden. And you were certainly not allowed to take your phone because of the days of the. By now, there were sort of these early flip phones, cell phones had cameras, low resolution cameras. So you could take these little sort of thumbnail pictures, but you could also send them at that point. You could actually email an image, which was a huge deal. And so somebody actually took a cell phone picture of the dead, and it got out. And finally, this was the first time. And Bush was pushed on this, and he said, "Oh, it's a tough thing, to see the American dead." It's like, I think Riverbend is right. If you're sending people to war, you better be prepared to see their bodies. That's the least you can do. Okay.